Protests on college campuses giving rise to anti-Semitism, and college presidents under fire for failing to show leadership to ease the tensions. In America, are we united or divided? We'll talk about it with pollster Stefan Hankin and Karys of Epoch Times and Minister Dr. Alex McFarland. All that and more on our next America's Hope. Good evening. I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope, and we welcome you to tonight's program. We have a lot to talk about in terms of what's going on throughout America and the world. As you know, many people are still out protesting against the Israel-Hamas war. We'll be talking about that this evening as we hear from Dr. Alex McFarland. We'll also hear from Stefan Hankin, a pollster, and hear what he's done with his research and what his findings have been thus far, not only as it relates to people protesting in the streets, but also how it reflects on the politics coming up in America, the 2024 presidential campaign. A lot to talk about. Let's get started. So many people, when they're focusing on the pro-Palestinian marches that have been going on and the protests that have taken place on college campuses, are looking to a recent hearing where college presidents actually failed to keep a standard of what's right and what's wrong. Karys is a producer at the Epoch Times and a fellow with the Jewish Leadership Project. She's been following this case and other cases quite closely because of the threat to the very nation of Israel itself and the anti-Semitism that is on the rise. Karys, first of all, your response to what college presidents have failed to do since the pro-Palestinian marches got underway and the protests on college campuses throughout this country.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back, Kelly. It's great to be with you. You know, I would say that people were very shocked by what they heard at this hearing from the three college presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT. But for those of us who have been following the type of anti-Semitism on college campuses for over a decade, this was kind of just par for the course. There is a double standard when it comes to Jews and the Jewish state on our university campuses. It has definitely worsened since the implementation of DEI and concepts such as intersectionality and critical race theory. But what it does is it splits the world into oppressed and oppressor categories. And because Jews are seen in America as white, which we are not. As we know, Jews come in all shapes and sizes and colors. And in Israel, more than half of all the Jews in that country are Mizrahi or Sephardi Jews of color and indistinguishable from their Arab brothers and sisters. Despite that, Jews in America, which are largely Eastern European, are framed as white, and therefore we are automatically put in the oppressor category. And therefore we are blamed for all of the same ills of society that are blamed on white people, right? Whiteness is considered evil in college campuses. And if Jews are white, then we are part of that. And then you end up seeing the same type of anti-Semitic tropes that you see on the far right of Jews controlling the world, controlling the wars, controlling the media. You see them being perpetrated by the far left, the same exact tropes, except they just replace the word Jews for Zionists. Now it's the Zionist lobby, and Israel's called the Jewish supremacist state. I mean, it's bizarre. It's upside down.
And to your point, Karys, a lot of people who are against Jews here in America, they not only has the rhetoric caused a lot of heartbreak within the Jewish community and for Jewish students attending college campuses here in America, but it's also caused a lot of fear, if you will, for synagogues and Jewish communities here in America. You know, I spoke with a security expert who has talked about the fact that his business has flourished at the sad state of affairs, and while he regrets that, uh, the reasons for his business flourishing, he also underscores the fact that he has to step in to protect these Jewish synagogues and communities because people that he knows, people that he loves, are in jeopardy because of this rise in anti-Semitism.
Mhm. Yeah, anti-Semitism tends to flare up in terms of conduct whenever something happens with Israel, right? We saw it too in the last 2021 war, and now we're seeing it again. And it really goes to show how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, because if it wasn't, then Jewish synagogues, as you say, and Jewish establishments, not even necessarily Israeli establishments, right? Just Jewish businesses or Jewish homes, they would not be targeted. So this is just proof for all those who believe that you can somehow distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. For all practical purposes, they end up manifesting the exact same way.
So Karys, what should be done on these college campuses? What leadership role should college presidents take on in order to prevent this kind of animosity towards Jewish people?
That's a great question. First of all, they have to be consistent in their policies. If they're going to be policing microaggressions and pronouns and those who are critical of lockdowns, that's just speech, and they're absolutely policing that, contrary to what they said in the hearing. Shouldn't they also be policing calls to violence? Now, I am for free speech, so I think that it should be people should be allowed to express their feelings about Israel and about Jews. I think that somebody on campus should be able to stand there and say, I hate Jews, but they certainly should not be able to stand there and say that, because that is incitement to violence. And that was really what this hearing was about. It's not about speech. It's about calls for an intifada, calls for a violent uprising, and there should be a no tolerance policy on that. In that front, we should see repercussions against faculty and against students for that. And those engaging in this type of protest activity who have foreign visas, those visas need to be revoked immediately. Yeah. That's a no-brainer.
So look, we're talking about college campuses, right? Academia, halls of higher learning that are dedicated to educating the future of America. So if we're educating people, why not educate them about the true tenets of Hamas and other radical Islamic groups that have vowed to always kill Jews and wipe them off the planet?
Your question is as good as mine. I think that just points to absolute corruption in academia, the fact that our educators are completely detached from reality. They are beholden to ideology, and actual violence is not violence, but violence to them in other contexts. So, I honestly, I don't know if their Ivy Leagues, especially, as well as other universities, are redeemable at this point. I mean, they have just gone so the rabbit hole in terms of embracing very radical worldviews that are detached from the majority of Americans. And I think really the solution isn't necessarily to reform it, but to build new institutions, as we see happening with places like the University of Austin, new places of higher education that will teach the truth about matters such as these.
Karys, we thank you for joining us, sharing your insights into this and your analysis of what's going on college campuses throughout America and just the very fabric of our society. Welcome to America's Hope. My next guest is Stefan Hankin. He is the founder and president of Lincoln Park Strategies, and Stefan has nearly 2 decades of experience in market research, data analytics, communication strategy, and public opinion polling and analysis, by the way, for clients that range from America's Promise to the City of Los Angeles to Raytheon to the Southern Environmental Law Center. Stefan, you've got quite a career going on for you, but polling is so important, especially for a time such as this, because so many people, as you look around the world globally, are impacted. Well, for one, let's start with the Israel-Hamas war, and we see that people are out protesting, and many of them protesting in favor of Palestinians and even Hamas, and very little support being shown publicly for Israel, which is trying to defend itself against the terror network Hamas. What does your polling indicate to you about this this cultural clash that we're seeing on the streets and college campuses in America?
Yeah, and first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And I mean, I think the big differentiator that we're seeing in the data is it comes down to age. So if you're under the age of 30, you have a very different view of what's happening in Israel for the most part than someone who's over the age of 50 or certainly over the age of 60. And I mean, some of this I would argue makes sense in that, if you're 25 years old, right, your experience or sort of worldview is shaped by the last 10, maybe 15 years, and you don't have sort of that historical context of what was happening in the region in the early 2000s, 1990s, or even certainly going back to the 1980s, and for folks who are over the age of 60, I mean, now we're getting into seeing on their TVs what was happening at the Munich Olympics and things like. So there's just if it's I think one of the big differentiators are is your experience based almost solely on Benjamin Netanyahu being the prime minister, or do you have a larger sort of view of what's happening? Now, obviously lots of attention on protests on college campuses and other locations. But what I think, we should keep in mind is when we're looking at the data, and even among, Gen Z and, our sort of able to vote but younger Americans, it's still a relatively small group that just sees everything as Israel bad, everything they're doing is not justified and it's all terrible. But most people, regardless of age, are in a place of, look, some of this is justified. I'm not comfortable with some of it. And now where that line lays is one of the big differences. But I think there's arguably almost more commonality here than there is in this stark difference. And, we're talking about maybe 20% of Americans have an extreme view of either everything Israel is doing is fine or nothing that Israel is doing is fine. And most of us, 80% of us, are living somewhere in between those two extremes.
That's really good polling, and it indicates exactly the two extremes, but also the people living in the middle, and many people living in the middle, which is usually the vast majority. Sometimes they're silent about what's going on. They don't always put their opinions out there. And historically, we can't forget the Holocaust either, in terms of what the Israeli people went through and why it's so precious to them, this thing called freedom, and making sure that they protect themselves against anything that would be equivalent to that. And certainly, if you look back on October 7th, they view that as being their 9/11, all those 15, as they've stated, 15 times more than what we experience here in America. When polling is done for you, are you able to dig down deep to see what the culture is? I think you already broke it down, saying that the younger people are not always aware experientially with the historical ramifications of a Holocaust or a Munich where hostages were taken during the Olympic games and killed. So I think many people, if they're older, like you said, they have a memory. But then on the other side of the equation, the Palestinians, do you see any indication that there's a propaganda war going on and being fueled by Iran and China and Russia and North Korea to keep promulgating this this quote unquote disdain against Israel?
Yeah, and I mean, we see it both in the sort of disdain for Israel and also support for what Russia's doing in the Ukraine, and and then it tends to be, at least from what we've seen in the data, we're not picking up much. I'll call it like pro-China talk, but it's just, but what definitely seems to be happening is, how do we create more and more divisions within the United States, within Western Europe, and that's the main goal. It's a little bit less let's be pro-Russia and more like let's cause problems. And I would argue that that's what is most likely coming out of places like China. I mean, we're absolutely seeing and picking up viewpoints that there's no fact on it of sort of the justification and the legitimacy of Russia invading Ukraine. That solidly exists. And, with a lot of this sort of the proving of the disinformation tends to be, my example is sort of like scientists with a black hole, right? Like you can't quite prove that it's there, but everything around it indicates that a black hole exists here. So therefore, we're going to say, okay, that is likely a black hole. And with the disinformation campaign, it's usually pretty hard to pick up a specific, like, here is the message, here is how they got that out there. But it's more like, we know these 4 different things are happening, and the only way those 4 things make sense is if disinformation is being spread. And, we can sort of make connections to the types of, whether it's media outlets or sort of the way that people take in for information, that there's a higher concentration of this disinformation taking hold through various channels, through various communities. So it points to the fact that this is happening, even though it's very hard to put your finger on and say this is exactly how it's happening.
Look, because of social media, Stefan, to your point, it's very hard to really pin down where disinformation is coming from. I got to ask you, beyond the polling, when you look at this and the fact that you realize that disinformation is going on, what concerns do you have about this taking place right here in our homeland, the United States of America?
I mean, I think my biggest concern is the fact that, look, I'm not saying anything radical here, right? That we're a fairly divided country when it comes to our politics. And the more that those divisions are, I'll say, used against us or inflamed, the worse it is for our country as a whole. And, and then we just recently, we haven't put this data out publicly yet, but it will be in the next week or so. We just started asking questions around what do people think is going to happen after the 2024 election. And we gave 5 different scenarios, ranging from, that assuming that Biden and Trump are going to be the nominees, which seems like the most likely outcome, if Biden wins the popular vote by 8 million votes and has a comfortable lead in the Electoral College, similar to 2020, what do you think is going to happen? And then all the way to, the same for if Trump wins the popular vote and wins the Electoral College comfortably. And, what we're seeing is that almost regardless of the scenario, that 30% of Americans are expecting to see violence at the same level of January 6th, if not even more. And sort of the most, I'll call it, dangerous potential outcome is, this coming down to one state and then one side feeling that that state was given to the other candidate without reason. And, and we're just under a year out, and we're already seeing 30 to 40% of Americans expecting that level of violence, and that is incredibly concerning.
I'm talking to Stefan Hankin. We'll be back with more details about what his polling is revealing. That's next on America's Hope. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to Stefan Hankin, who is the founder and president of Lincoln Park Strategies. And Stefan, as I've stated earlier, has nearly 2 decades of experience in market research, data and analytics, communication strategy, and public opinion polling. And most notably, you were talking about the fact that the polling has revealed what's going on in terms of the disinformation that goes on here in America as it relates to what's happening between Israel and Hamas and Palestinians. But then you started talking about the upcoming presidential campaign. And by now, Stefan, and many people who follow politics know that Liz Cheney is actually talking about the fact that she may make a run for the president, even in terms of a third-party candidate, to do anything to stop the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, from becoming president, because she fears that a vote for him and a re-election for him could be the unraveling, as she says, quote, of our republic as we know it. You get any polling on that? Does Ms. Cheney have a chance if she were to actually run?
No, and I mean, I think, and it's not just her. It's just based on the system that we have. It is nearly impossible for a third-party candidate to win, right? But now, what you can be is a spoiler to one party or another, and and we've seen this throughout the years. I mean, I think the most successful, at least in recent history, third-party candidate was Ross Perot in '92, and I think, arguably, like, all he really did was he spent a lot of money and then helped Bill Clinton end up becoming the 42nd? No? Yeah, number I should know off the top of my head, but president in the 92 election. And just the way that our forefathers set up our system of government, it's a de facto two-party system. So once you start putting a third party in there, there's not a viability for winning. There's just a viability for taking away votes. So I do not think she can win. I think that it's interesting. I mean, I think she is probably more likely to take votes away from Trump and helping Biden, although I think there would be some voters that are, without her in the race, would support Biden, but aren't really, big fans or really really enjoying the idea of voting for a Democrat, but want somewhere to go that's not Trump. But I think more votes would pull away from her. And then, if there was, I think it's with RFK Jr., he seems to be pulling a little bit from both sides. So that's a little bit of a wild card. But then, if you put someone coming in on the left running a third party, then that's going to take votes away from Trump. So it's much more about sort of, I'll call it, spoiling someone else's chances. And I think she would have a really tough time winning any states. So it's not even putting the electoral college in question. It's just more, just causing problems for one candidate or the other.
Well, what does your polling indicate about the fact that the former president of the United States is doing so well, and he hasn't even appeared in any debate with the other Republican challengers that have been trying to go after him and gain in polling, and they're not making any headway at all?
Yeah, I mean, he is, hats off to his team of coming up with the idea that we're not going to engage because we're just so far ahead. I think that tactically, very good, very good approach. I think debates should happen, and anyone who's running that has a chance to win should be involved in the debates. I think that's should be part of our process, but there are no rules around that. So I'll say good for them for making some solid strategic decisions. And what we tend to see in the numbers is the less he's in the news, the sort of the better he does, but then also if he's really in the news, then he does better with certain types of voters. So he kind of has he gets to have his cake and eat it too.
Very good point in terms of what you've been able to view in terms of the campaign trail for the Republican Party. On the other side, there's the Democrat, the current president of the United States, the incumbent, who is vowing to run for re-election, of course, and has announced that. But then the polling indicates that quite a few people are concerned about his age.
On paper, I think most Democrats there's not much to argue with on, what he's done, what he's been able to accomplish. And there's just sort of this one piece. And then I think the other factor that's in there is, and obviously generalizing here, but, Democrats really want to fall in love with someone. They want to feel engaged and excited. And then for people who were around in the 2008 election, right? Like Obama kind of ruined it for everyone else because there was just such a level of excitement and just a desire to vote for this person. And that is tough to replicate, right? So, and I think the honest answer is look, most politicians are people you like, but aren't necessarily the most exciting people in the world. And but that's fine, right? We just want someone in there who's going to do a good job and is going to, push for the issues that we feel are important. But, Democrats do really want that fire in the belly. And, that's just not the personality that Biden has.
Yeah, you talked about the former President Barack Obama, and you were part of the polling team that actually helped Mr. Obama become the 44th president of the United States. But let me ask you more specifically then, before we come to a conclusion, what is the polling indicating about the psyche or the morale of the American people? Because Americans, they look at the news every day, they're bombarded with the negativity, they're bombarded with not only politics but also mass shootings and the southern border and what's happening in Israel. I mean, Americans are constantly looking at things, and they're looking at the economy. Does it all boil down to the economy? Is that the main concern among Americans, or is your polling indicating something beyond just the economy? How much is the gas? How much is the food to put on the table? And how much is my house? Are they looking at that and more?
Yeah, I mean, everything factors in, right? And then, so maybe not shocking given the world that we live in, right? But our most recent numbers, we're asking people how they feel about their economic situation now compared to a year ago, and half of Americans say that they're worse off this now than they were a year ago, and half are saying they're at the same level, or better. And it's about 30% saying it's the same level, about 20% saying that they're better off than they were a year ago. So again, we have this just complete divide.
In your polling, I know you haven't really done any research specifically on hope, but what is your hope for America?
What is my hope for? I mean, I hope we can get past this divide, right? And maybe rose-colored glasses on the past, but it felt like a couple decades ago there was certainly not universal political agreement, right? Like that's never going to happen. But there was the idea that, look, we agree on what the problems are and we agree on where we would like to be, but we have a disagreement on how we get from point A to point B. And like if we could get back to that place and viewing, if the person who has an opposite political view of me, not as an enemy or not as a terrible human being, but just as someone who has a different worldview, then we're going to be in a much better place. I'm just not certain how long it's going to take, if ever, to get back to that point.
Stefan, I appreciate you. Thanks for joining us, man. Stefan Hankin is the founder and president of Lincoln Park Strategies. And like you, my friend, we can learn to agree to disagree, but still live in harmony. That's the bottom line.
Agreed.
So if you do a polling on that, make sure you bring it back to America's Hope and say, hey, Kelly, we went out to find out what America's Hope is, and here's what we came up with. Love to hear it.
I will definitely do that.
Welcome to America's Hope. So I'm talking to our first guest tonight. He really needs no introduction for people who know him and follow him, but we're going to do that nevertheless because this is America's Hope. We like bringing all of our people into the family to give more hope to America and the world. Dr. Alex McFarland is doing just that. He's a youth, religion, and culture expert. He is the author of more than 20 books and is heard live daily on 200 plus stations of the American Family Radio Network. He serves as director of Worldview for Cherish Bible College, Woodland Park, Colorado, and co-hosts the Truth and Liberty TV broadcast. He joins us now. Alex, good of you to join us this hour.
Well, thank you, Kelly. It's always an honor. I've got such a great respect for you as a journalist and communicator, and to be on with you is a privilege.
Well, it's a privilege to have you on. We've got a lot to talk about because America, as you know, is going through quite a few cultural divides. We have cancel culture, we have cultural wars in terms of Israel and Hamas and what's unfolded there. And let's start right there, as a matter of fact, because what we're seeing is a bigger picture between Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and then what took place on October 7th, which many people have kind of just swept under the rug, October 7th becoming the 9/11 for Israel. And then, of course, quite naturally, there is the concern for the cost of innocent human lives throughout Gaza. In your travels and in people that you've talked to, how are people squaring this situation within their hearts when they realize that people are out protesting in the streets and on college campuses, but doing it all in the name of protecting Hamas and also talking about innocent lives within the Palestinian people and actually denouncing Israel for defending itself?
Well, Kelly, I'm very honored to speak to these issues. And, I think about 3 months ago today, you and I were in Washington, and you and I were at a conference, and it just amazes me how the world has changed even in 90 days. So much has gone on. And when you and I were in Washington, there was plenty to talk about in the news even then. And it just seems like every day, every 24-hour cycle, there are more and more things going on. Regarding Israel and the October 7 attack by Hamas is very interesting. And if I may, first of all, I want to speak to the spiritual implications, because the day before October 6th, just ironically enough, I was in the studio answering mail and doing some short videos, and people were asking me about Ezekiel 38, talking about in the last days there would be nations of the Arabian Peninsula that would attack Israel. Psalm 83 basically says the same thing. And I was cutting this video, Kelly, talking about how ironic that one of the ancient enemies of Israel was the Philistines out of Ashkelon. And Hamas, the founder of Hamas, was born in Ashkelon, same as Goliath of Gath. And I woke up the morning of Saturday, October 7, and the news is blowing up about the attacks on Israel. And so I preface what you and I are talking about by saying that, I think we're really living in historic times. And I think it has been so ever since May 14, 1948, when Israel was reconstituted as a nation, their homeland, which for, really 4,000 plus years, the Israeli people have been in what we call the Holy Land for 4 millennia. It's uncanny. And so the question becomes, who has the land? I would say this, and then I want to share something that a dialogue with a college group I recently had. Look, God loves all people. Arabs have a right to life. Muslims have a right to life. But at the same time, the land of Israel, by historical precedent, and I would also argue by divine right, it belongs to the Jewish people. And Muhammad was born in 571. Islam started in 610. 3,500 years before the birth of Muhammad, Jewish people were in the land of Israel. So it's a puzzlement to me, Kelly, why modern Westerners that pride themselves on the rights of indigenous people, and they pride themselves on the rights of the victim, as clearly Israel is the victim here. Israel is the indigenous people group times 4 millennia. And I would say America, it's in our best interest on a lot of levels to stand with Israel. This is not to exploit or harm or wish ill will against the Palestinian people, but we've got to have the moral courage and the foresight to call terrorism what it is. And what Hamas did and is doing is terrorism. And terrorists are not to be placated, they're to be stopped. And that's what Israel and the ally nations of the world need to do.
Powerful what you just stated there, and it's an analogy of what's going on there. And yet when you look at the lay of the land here in America and what's happening on college campuses, I've got to ask you a deeper question that you've been addressing for quite some time now, and that is, can the U.S. Constitution and the West coexist with Islam? Or let me preface it this way, with radical Islam.
Great question. It's funny. Some of our early founders, including Jefferson, believed that the Mohammedans, and that's in the 19th century how they would refer to Muslims, they believed that they just would not assimilate into Europe and what we now call the West. And that's really true. And I want to be very clear. Anyone is free to migrate to the United States and go through the normal, INS protocols. But if you become an American citizen, you have to assimilate. And that means, and Kelly, I'm keenly aware that what I'm about to say is very politically incorrect. And, some people will go bananas about this, and I'm sorry. But look, becoming an American and a citizen means assimilating. Our ways, our government, our laws, and yes, our language, which is English. And I know there are many, millions of people that practice the Muslim faith, and they're people, good neighbors. In fact, my wife and I, right now, where we live in North Carolina, our neighbor, one house over, is a Muslim family, and we're cordial. We love them. Now, as a Christian, I want to represent Jesus Christ before their watching eyes, but we see them at the store. We fellowship there in homes and neighborhood. But here's the point. The the Muslims that believe in Sharia, and they want a global caliphate, and they believe that as fundamental Muslims, they have a duty to lie to the infidel, that's me, and non-Muslims and Jews, and they want to, as Yasser Arafat said in 1984. And by the way, Kelly, I have visited 72 sites in Israel and the Holy Land. And I was on the Temple Mount dialoguing with a group of college students. The females were in burqas, and they were chanting, Israel driven to the sea, Israel driven to the sea. So what naive Westerners need to know is what Harvard professor Samuel Huntington and a Carter administration cabinet member, Samuel Huntington wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. And he wasn't saying this as a Christian, but as a historian and academic. And I would urge people to read The Clash of Civilizations. Huntington said that naive Western liberals must get their mind around the fact that radical Muslims will not assimilate. They will bide their time until they can kill the infidel and take over. And so, look, we live and let live. We love all people. But the fact is, in America, we must preserve a constitutional representative republic. And all of this diversity and inclusion and basically opening the borders and relaxing the laws, that is jeopardizing the preservation of our constitutional republic.
Yeah, it's more than reading the tea leaves. You can actually look at story after story after story. And then, of course, October 7th, and the fact that many people are still saying, like Iran, we view America as a great Satan, and we look at Israel as a little Satan. That is a very sinister and yet not an idle threat. So
right.
How do you help people understand that?
Yeah, America, the great Satan, Israel, the little Satan. I mean, these are not the words of people acting in good faith, wanting equity and quid pro quo, are they? I mean, and I've been on so many college campuses, 200 American university campuses to speak, and I've got to say this, and I've spent the majority of my adult life in education, Kelly, the ivory tower American elites, they're so naive. And what's interesting is they don't woke, progressive, liberal, call them what you will, they don't realize or acknowledge what the founders recognized, that people have a sin nature. And not all belief systems are equally valid. Now, I want to be very clear. Here in America, I'm a Christian. I wish everybody was in a relationship with the Lord Jesus. That would be wonderful. But look, nobody has to believe anything. If somebody doesn't want to be a Christian, that's their prerogative. So like Bill Maher, I don't know if you saw this 2 days ago, James Carville was on with Bill Maher, and James Carville, who I think if he ever spoke truth, his jaw would fall out. But James Carville said that Christians are a greater threat to America than Al-Qaeda. Well, that's just not even a rational statement. I mean, that is the words of a person that's a brainwashed ideologue, not a person acknowledging reality. I've been around the world, third world countries, developing nations. Everywhere you find wells, hospitals, schools, literacy, the betterment of the human condition, it was Christians that put it there.
Alex, let me ask you, what is your concern about the youth of America right now? You talked about how they have this feeling within them and amongst them that they're not getting the whole truth and nothing but the truth. How do you convey that truth to them, that they're valuable, and that their lives are meant to be something of value and significance?
Well, you know, either there is a God or there isn't. And really, what a person decides about God will inform countless other decisions in life that will follow. The founders of America believed that, I mean, Jefferson in the Declaration, endowed by our Creator. So here's what we talk about. We talk about Christianity and Jesus Christ. And, you know, my favorite time of the year is now upon us, Kelly, Christmas, the coming of Christ, the most documented fact of the ancient world. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was born. And we tell kids, and they resonate with it, that Jesus came because he loves you, and because your life has a purpose. But we also talk about American exceptionalism and what made America unique. We're the only nation whose citizens have walked on the moon. We're the only nation. I mean, you've got to understand, in 1776, in the era of the transatlantic slave trade, the idea of self-government, not a monarchy, not a dictatorship, not an oligarchy even, but a constitutional representative Judeo-Christian republic, self-government, and then that colonial farmers could fight and prevail over the King of England. I mean, it was amazing. You know, in 1630, when lawyer and minister John Winthrop said the eyes of the world are upon us, yes, they were. And I'll tell you why. Because the eyes of the world, Canada wouldn't help us. Benjamin Franklin went through the snow to solicit the help of Canada. See, the eyes of the world, they wanted to see just how badly the King of England would string up and skin alive those brazen colonists that declared to, as Jefferson said, call out his abuses and usurpations. And so America was birthed, and I tell these kids about American exceptionalism, that we became a free nation within just a few short decades after the Constitution. The abolitionist movement was underway. Praise God. And slavery was abolished. You know, would to God that slavery didn't exist on day one, but it took into the middle of the 19th century. But at least our belief in God and the dignity and worth of every human motivated us to abolish slavery.
Alex, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to ask you one final question. What's your hope for America?
My hope is in the Lord, but you know what? I win either way. If we advocate for our nation, that's good. If we go to be with Christ, that's good. So for the believer, there's no bad outcome. And I just want to say to everybody watching, I've spent 35 years researching, Kelly, traveled the world, interviewed hundreds of scholars, been to libraries around the world, written 20 books. Let me say, regarding this thing called Christmas and the incarnation, that God so loved the world, he sent his one and only son. Folks, it's real. It's real. God loves you. Christ died for you. He's as close by as a prayer. Everything I've ever researched for 3 decades only affirms and underscores what I believed at age 21. So Kelly, if I can be so bold, I just want to say to all of your dear viewers, if you've never put your faith in Christ, I want to say the Lord loves you and he will hear you. So call out to him today and make this Christmas the best one ever. Christmas is about gift giving. Here's a gift, your heart to the Lord, because he loves you so. That's my hope.
Alex, thank you. Dr. Alex McFarland here on America's Hope. Appreciate you, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Bless you.
My final word for tonight is that according to what the polls have revealed, we are very divided as a nation. But according to what we should believe in our hearts about having the hope and the preservation of our nation, let's go back to the Constitution. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And by the way, learning to agree and even disagree, but still living in harmony. That's what we must do, because united we stand, divided we fall. So let's keep hope alive, America. Let it prevail and endure. one nation dedicated to liberty and justice for all. Until next time, good night. God bless.
Your America and my America.
United we stand, divided